Welcome back, listening audience. This is the second of our two podcasts today. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I want to remind everybody to hit and smash the like and subscribe button and share this with as many people as you can. And please feel free to comment. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Kevin Barry, and the Rob Pincus. I don't think there's much introduction needed for you, Rob. You are a friend of the show. You are a board member. You are family. You are a person who runs a gun company, Avidity Arms. You are a world-renowned trainer. You are everything. You are a lion that I feel got dropped into a deer convention in Seattle. And that's what we're here to talk about is the gun violence prevention or harm reduction conference that happened in Seattle last week. And the audience understands a little bit about what was going on there, and they heard it from my perspective. And I think my perspective is one perspective. Sometimes I'm a little naive, so I want to get the other perspectives. I want to have you on, Yamani and Barlow, to talk about the different things that they saw. But why don't we just jump right in and talk about how you are and how it was and everything, how it will be. It was a lot of fun watching you work. That's all I'm going to say.
It was that I think it was Kenny Barlow who came up with that concept of, when's Rob speaking? During the last 10 minutes of every panel when the Q&A mic is open, you can find Rob speaking. So yeah, it was interesting. And I didn't know what to expect. I mean, as if people have not watched, which includes me, I have not watched the earlier podcast you did sort of explaining the structure of it. If you haven't watched that, go watch it so we don't have to rehash it now, because I know what Mike said. I know what the structure was. From my point of view, because I did not know what the structure was going into this conference, I was sort of ready for anything, right? I mean, Mike, Kevin, you guys know my policy is like pretty much always say yes. If you get a chance to be in the room, if you get a chance to articulately explain the perspective of the gun owners, especially in a room that doesn't have a lot of gun owners, or especially gun rights focused gun owners, and let's get in there. And we've all taken the shots for doing that sometimes, but this was one where, especially like with you as a speaker and with so many other people that I've worked with or been on panels with or done Zooms with before, I really wanted to attend. So I was glad that I did. And I was really glad that it was interactive, right? It wasn't just sitting in a room with 799 people while all of them took their turn up at the podium. The fact that it was broken up, that there were multiple rooms, that there were multiple presenters in each room 4 to 5 times throughout the day meant that we had to kind of divide and conquer. There were definitely plenty of sessions where I was torn between where to go, and I chose to go to areas that I think I've been more active in and that I felt maybe more knowledgeable in, especially as the conference went. Originally, I was going there to kind of figure out what it was. And I probably picked things the first day that were more like, I didn't even know that was going to be covered. Let me go into that room. As the conference went on, I felt like it was more important for me to be in the room with topics like the privately manufactured firearms topic that was the last day, where I wanted it to not only learn what research had been done, but also potentially be there to maybe challenge some ignorance if people really were talking about things they didn't understand, which is unfortunately often the situation with researchers they know how to do research, but they don't know the difference between semi-automatic and fully automatic. And I felt like privately manufactured guns, quote unquote, ghost guns, was a big area there. So I had fun with it. And 99% of my interactions were really positive, and I did learn a lot.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that needs to be made clear is that we were very welcome. And for the most part, with maybe a couple instances where somebody may have got a little heated and let their emotion to get the best of them when having this discussion, I felt like a lot of the researchers there, a lot of the people who attended wanted to pick our brains about things. And if they saw us make a face or something like that, they wanted to know the why, and they were genuinely curious why there was that face of disagreement and things like that. So we were definitely welcome with open arms. I think it was a huge step for the gun industry. This is one of those things that will never be talked about, right? Because it's not that, it is what it is, right? But historically,
Yeah, it's very low key. I mean, I
us
think
having a presence.
with the communications director from the National Shooting Sports Foundation there, I think, that's a very conservative organization for all the obvious reasons. They don't want to be pinned with, the trade organization of the firearms industry said this at the conference. So Bill's a quiet observer, but I think he's also a quiet observer of those of us who are less likely to remain quiet, and can speak to the reactions he saw that we got, which again were mostly positive. There was, so people were like, well, which one wasn't positive? Because that's the juice, right, on the internet. So there was one guy, and Kenny and I both interacted with him. We went up to him after one of his. He was using 30-year-old data to suggest that storage practices don't really make a difference when it comes to suicide prevention. And the logic being, well, if I have the code to my safe, then I am just, if I want to get my gun, I'm just going to put the code in. But we know that with things like cause a pause, and with the behavioral and the proactive mental health care and the preaching we've done, especially over the last 10 years, let alone the last 30, the changes in the way we talk about how storage and staging, the way we do it responsibly, can affect people's impulsive acts of suicide. I think it's out of date material, and that's what I wanted to talk to him about. He, he went right away to anecdote and emotion, and well, if I had a friend, I wouldn't, and they were suicidal, I wouldn't let them have a gun in their house under any conditions. Do you not care about your friend enough to do that? And it was like, okay, never mind. But other than one guy, almost everybody. I think you were there one time when a researcher from Rutgers, who actually sent me a follow up email that I just read this morning, he had made some assumptions in his presentation, and I asked that clarification, on the mic in front of the room, as I prefer to do. Hey, can I ask you about this? And did you consider this? Did you control for this? Using the language that they're using is really important, right? Not just getting up on the mic and saying, "Have you ever heard of the founding fathers?" And he was really, I think, surprised by the question, and he admitted right up there on the mic on the podium. He admitted that he hadn't considered that, but it was worth considering. And he came up to me 2 or 3 or 4 times over the next couple of days to revisit the same topic and ask if I had other thoughts along it, and then even sent me this follow up email. And that was what I found most of the time was happening when I raised my hand and asked a question, and when I got up on the mic and asked a question that they really truly had not considered from the perspective of the gun owner, or maybe taking in a piece of information, like what was happening in the 90s and the 2000s with the publication of concealed carry permit obtainers getting published in liberal newspapers to kind of shame them, being tied to property crime. It may not just be the fact that they got a concealed permit and were more likely to be victim of a property crime. It could have had something to do with that publication of their name and address. And that one researcher was very, very honest about that. Yeah, I hadn't considered that. And you're right. I did come across that in the literature. Well, that's why we're there, I think, right? To keep those things in the conversation.
Yeah, I want to rewind for a second though, because I want to go back to the person that was using the 30-year-old data, right? And I know who that person was. I actually worked with that
Yeah.
person in the White House.
Yeah.
And that person, we are fine outside of talking about guns, but he is emotional. And I remember being in the White House with him, and the first thing he said in his little speech when we were all making the intros was, the best way to prevent gun violence is to keep people away from guns, like, period. Like, there was no nuance. It was just, yeah, I mean, the best way to keep people away from getting drunk is to keep alcohol away from them. Like, Captain Obvious, that's a role for people. Like, I mean, it's a cartoon world, but it is what it is. There's something else that he said, though, that I thought was kind of outlandish. And being that I wasn't there, but I heard enough people talk about that segment that he was speaking at. Didn't he say something to the effect of, do you have $10 million to do the research?
Yeah. So he said, because there was an obvious and accurate and reasonable question about 30-year-old data, and it doesn't take into account all the work we're doing. And he was talking, his data also, I think, was really heavily weighted, or maybe even exclusively related to veteran suicide. And I was talking about, isn't the work that we've done, and the veterans community, the firearm owning community, the work that we've done over the last 3 decades, in terms of suicide prevention and awareness that this is a risk, that if you have the gun in your house and you're having ideations and you're in these crises moments, that yeah, it is these two things should not come together. And that's why we have ideas like take the gun to the gun shop, take the firing pins out, give them to your friend, put the picture of the safe right behind me, a picture of my 2 daughters and my granddaughter on it, and a guns and mental health podcast sticker, like the cause of pause stuff. Shouldn't that be, well, we just don't know. But I'll tell you, I wouldn't want to have my friend have a gun in the house, that kind of thing, right? It's like, well, from our perspective, trying to be reasonable, right? From our perspective, as gun owners and fighting this fight every day, because it is gun owners shooting themselves with their guns, it's our community that's the affected population. It would be great if that research could get done. We'd love for that research to get done with updated data. And he literally is also a weird dynamic, because I walked up to the dais that he was on. So he's leaning over the table, like kind of like looming over us, and in this very odd like posturing. Well, I'll tell you what, if you have $10 million, I'll do the research. And it was like, really? And ironically, this morning, a mutual friend of ours from Wisconsin, a journalist who does really good work, sent me an article that he wanted me to read that he had published. And sure enough, that guy's cited in it. And I was just like, I roll. I'm never going to be able to, his name's going to keep popping up. You know, it's like buy a red car, see red cars everywhere. I'm just going to constantly see this guy now.
Yeah. So I didn't feel like we were out to do the gotcha moments. I feel like we were there to, correct people if they said something or make them see a different perspective. But there was times where I feel like we did get them in gotcha moments, and I didn't think it was necessarily, intentional. It's just the way the conversation flows. Did you feel like there was any other moments where you got somebody where you were kind of shocked that they didn't
Yeah, the
have the
biggest,
response?
so I think I was, again, kind of, I know I'm going to say this a lot, and I've already said a couple times. I was more shocked by the acknowledgement that the questions, the observations were reasonable, or the admission that that was a limit. Like, when they present it, those 2 days were very intellectually, the first two full days were the two most intellectually challenging full days that I've had in a long time. I mean, like, I don't know, explosive breaching school. There's a lot of math and things are going to blow up, right? And people are around or when I've led instructor classes, like that's demanding. When I'm juggling media or a video shoot or a training conference, those things but I put that on myself. As far as like sitting down kind of in a classroom academic setting and having to deal with confidence rates and coefficients and cohorts and asterisks and exponents and charts and like it was heavy, right? So there's a lot of heavy stuff, but at the beginning it's like mission statement, thesis, what's the problem? And at the end, I like the fact that as part of their professional procedure, they're like, here were the limitations of our study. Here's the conclusions. And most of that was really objective. So what I found overwhelmingly when something like the reporting of people's names and addresses in certain communities could have been tied to property crimes, they would admit it. They would just be like, yeah, hadn't thought about that. And it wasn't like a roll of the eyes, like, yeah, I knew this was going to come up because there was going to be a gun guy in the room. It was really mostly stuff they hadn't thought of, which is why I think it's important for us to be in the room. There was one time when I will say I felt almost like bad, but I had to do it. And it was definitely a gotcha. There's so much talk, key phrases like lived experience, right? Like it's like a trump card you throw down, right? Well, I've been shot at, or I lost a family member to firearms involved suicide. So what I say matters more than you. Right. And sometimes it's from the podium, people saying, we want people involved who have lived experience. But when it's thrown down as a trump card, it can be distracting from the objectivity. Right. The other is like the affected community or the affected population, raising one group, up on a pedestal, and maybe for very good reasons if they're more affected. But I find that sometimes seems like a pandering statement that's used. So there was a presentation one day about breaking down $130 million worth of federal funding for research. And it was like for the researchers to know where the funding's going and how it broke down on different categories. And of course, we know suicide is the biggest problem. And all three of us on this podcast are heading towards the most affected age bracket, right? So it's suicides of older white guys is the biggest chunk. If you were going to pick one affected population that is the most affected by what they're talking about, so they call firearms harms, it's us. You don't see a lot of guys or gals getting up on the podium and saying, well, we know it's really important to study the negative effects of guns on old white guys. So here. So other populations are talked about a lot more. Well, in this presentation, there was this great little, bar graph of how much money went different places. Well, in fact, in the terminology, it's we are non-Hispanic whites, right? It's not just white guys and it's not old white guys. It's, advanced, non-Hispanic whites of advanced age or something. So that wasn't on the bar graph. Other demographics were represented by race. There was suicide prevention was only like 13%. Studying firearms owners themselves was like less than 15%. So of course, when I got up on the mic, I said, it's interesting you broke this all down as a member of the most affected population that does have some lived experience dealing with loss of friends and family to these acts of violence. I'm curious about the lack of funding specifically targeting guys like me or guys like I'm going to be, older white guys, because it is our population that has to deal with the biggest problem. And the biggest problem is with firearms involved death is suicide. That was definitely, I felt like I was pulling a little bit of a gotcha, but it needed to be said. And there were three people in that room, one on the podium and two in the audience, who were involved with that study, who all felt compelled to respond very much like there was backpedaling, there was apologizing, there was, oh, I don't know that, we did look at that. I don't know how it didn't make the slide kind of stuff. And that was probably the most interesting response I got. That was almost like, ooh, we got called out and we need to sort of cover it up, instead of just saying, yeah, you're right. We didn't focus on that because that's not where the money's going right now, which I would rather they had said. But also that response was prompted by me definitely pulling a gotcha. I think the rest of it all was really, again, isolated moments, but for the most part, it was just, hey, I wonder if they thought about this. And I was fully prepared to find out that they did. And sometimes it did turn out that way, like the privately manufactured firearms. The Catherine Fowler, who did that research and gave that presentation, she had her answers ready, like she's sharp. And that data showed something I'm not surprised by, that the number of fatalities involving privately manufactured quote unquote ghost guns is incredibly small over her very thorough 18-year data set research, less than 100. Counting the killing in New York City last week, if that in fact was done with a 3D printed gun, it's still less than 100. And the numbers track: 55% suicide, less than 3% accident or negligence, 2% unknown, and the rest of them homicides. So the numbers track consistently with traditional guns, which again says to me, we don't need to make a big deal about ghost guns. We need to worry about what some people are doing with any kind of gun.
Yeah, I was really glad that you were there to kind of point that out, that, they've created this fear, especially the media, with something like a ghost gun, and seeing that number less than 118 is very eye-opening for people. And I felt like they did a lot of tiptoeing, which I kind of understand, because I guess I was a little disappointed, because I felt like numbers are numbers and research is research. And basically, like, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, like when talking about black homicide, who's killing who, right? Like, to me, I was kind of like, I always felt like they talked about black homicide, but then many times they would tie it to systemic racism.
Yeah.
And
There was a lot of that.
things like that, because that makes me think, if I'm a regular person, it's like, oh, people from Beverly Hills are going into Compton and they're smoking people and then, leaving. And that's just not the case. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, why can't we just talk about this honestly? It's a problem. It needs to be addressed. But I feel like we're doing a disservice when we tiptoe or we act like something is bigger than something else. And I felt like a lot of that was going on, but that was just
Yeah.
my
And
opinion. I thought suicide was ignored for the most part in every
yeah, there wasn't
conference
a
I
lot on
went to.
suicide. I want to circle back to what there wasn't a lot of. But one of the problems I have trying to go down that road, and in terms of saying, hey, can we call this what it is? Can we talk about it more directly? Is that what happens is the goalpost tends to move, because I've had that conversation with people interested in that violence, just the violence prevention conversation, is that it's yeah, we're talking about guns and firearms harms and firearms involved deaths, and we're going to talk about the affected population in the black community and homicides, but we're not going to talk about how those homicides actually play out. We're just going to talk about the fact that it exists. When you want to go one step and talk about how those homicides are occurring, what ends up happening in my experience with the systemic racism flag, is that then it's, well, let's talk about why there's crime in those populations, and let's talk about these other economic issues, and let's talk about educational issues, and let's talk about urban community issues. And all of a sudden you just can't get away from it. Like, eventually it's going to be, because somebody bought somebody and brought him over on a boat, and that's why this is happening in Detroit last week. And I understand how you got there, but today we really can't do anything about that. That was bad. We stopped doing that. Now today, let's talk about what we can do here, and not have to throw the racist flag, because it's not racism when two people of the same race who don't have any issue about each other's mom's background, heritage, shoot at each other. And that doesn't matter if it's white, Hispanic, black, whatever. Just take race out of it, right? And I think that's really tough. I'll tell you right now, like, I don't know if you guys have read, we had that Madison, Wisconsin school shooting yesterday. Of course, there was a whole bunch of misinformation flying around. I don't know if you guys have read the 6-page quote unquote manifesto that she left. There's some blatant racism in there. It doesn't fit anybody's narrative. I don't think we're going to see that. Nobody of the race that she's condemning with slurs and in description in there was injured or shot, from what I understand, in that racism card will not be thrown in this one and won't be talked about because it was a white girl shooting white people in a predominantly white school, as I understand it. So it'll be interesting to see, where that lands. And I just think it is a convenient card that people play, even in the research community. That card was thrown out and played when convenient, or honestly, go back to the $10 million concept, when profitable. And I get it that a lot of this is nonprofit organizations and academic organizations and like that, and they're not necessarily buying Ferraris with the money they get, but they are doing the work they want to do. They're staying employed, they're getting credit, they're getting notoriety, they're getting published, and it helps them advance their careers. And if the funding is towards problems related to systemic racism, then that's where the proposals are going to go. And I'm excited that we actually have some conversations and follow up, one of them later today, Mike, where you and I are going to be talking to some of these researchers about how to maybe steer funding towards things that gun owners really think is important in terms of reducing negative outcomes.
It almost seems like the researchers' hands are tied because there's so much funding around those areas. After those findings, even if it was just as raw of this is what's happening and this is the population that it's happening against, they don't have that trusted messenger to really have any solution for that finding. So it almost has to move the goalpost to keep that funding stream going.
I mean, but that's like saying, the YouTubers have to give positive reviews of every gun because otherwise the gun companies aren't going to pay them to review guns, right? At some point, that's shilling, or at some point, that's a negative thing. Like you can say, well, that's how you have to do it to stay in business, but I don't think that's a good enough reason. But I do think that drives people. So I think there are people who probably come into this with really good intentions. They start looking around and they're like, logically, if you're new to this environment, you might say, well, where's the funding? Because if the people giving the money are serious about solving the same problems I want to solve, then they probably have already done the research. It's kind of like Mike, when you talk about the founding of Walk Talk America. I'm sure the mental health community knows how to fix this. Let's just get them some more money to do it. And then we found out that really wasn't the case. I think that researchers and funders probably have that same kind of relationship. And that's unfortunate because a lot of the funding is agenda driven. And that's something I can see how researchers can get caught up in, especially at some of the more prestigious schools and organizations where it means a lot for them to keep that going. While the football team's getting millions of dollars a year for hats and water bottles, they can't get a lab, or they can't get place space on campus, or they can't get another postdoc brought in funded. So it is. I get why they're chasing the money, but it doesn't make it okay.
So we got a question in the chat. There's a large segment of the group veterans. I didn't feel like there were many veterans in there. I thought there was a lot of people that work for the VA, which is
I think this was coming when Rob was breaking down the fundings. It might be about the audience, but I think it was more about funding, about research towards veterans. I could be wrong.
Yeah, veterans was in there. It wasn't one of the largest bars, but it wasn't one of the smallest. It was probably a little bit bigger than firearms owners and general suicide prevention. Veterans do get a lot of attention and a lot of funding. There's a lot of funding that comes through the VA. There's a lot of projects aimed at veterans and from working with veterans organizations. So a lot of talk about veterans, but not a lot of specific representation. But I kind of get that because it's a research conference, right? I'm not mad that there weren't a lot of hunters or shooting competitors there either. It's like I would say, like sometimes people in the gun industry, like gun owners, will get mad if they find out like somebody's a FUD or not even maybe a gun owner that works for a gun company. But like I want the gun company accountant to be really good at accounting. I don't really care whether they're a gun owner or not. A graphic designer working for a gun company needs to know which way the bullets go in the magazine for that ad, right? But at the same time, they don't need to really be a gun owner. And hopefully somebody else is looking at that ad before it goes in. They need to be good at graphic design and photography or, whatever. So I think in that case, I don't need researchers to be gun owners. I need them to be sensitive to the realities of what is responsible gun ownership. And this is what I've come away with is there's a big difference between someone who is funding or doing or presenting research or citing research with the goal of there should be fewer guns in people's hands, and somebody who's funding, doing, citing, or presenting research with the goal of there should be fewer negative outcomes involving firearms. And those are worlds apart. And I will say, 80% of the people there that were aware of that difference at that conference were on the side of reducing negative outcomes, even if it's like cynically, like they accept, okay, people are going to have guns. Let's just have less tragedy, right? I think, however, there was a good solid 50% of that conference that is not aware that there's a difference between those two things. And that comes back to the cultural competency thing we do at Walk Talk America, making sure people understand there is such a thing as responsible gun ownership. And if you haven't accepted that, then I don't really think you have a seat at the table. You have to accept that there is such a thing as responsible gun ownership. Otherwise, your office should not be at Rutgers. It should not be at University of Michigan. It shouldn't be at Yale. Your seat at the table should be in the Giffords offices, in the Everytown offices, in the Brady office, because you're anti-gun. You're not trying to reduce negative outcomes, regardless of whether that means more or less guns.
Yeah, it was really interesting. A couple of things that got brought up to me, like themes, when I would be talking to somebody at the bar. One was everyone wanted to point out that they weren't allowed to do research on guns. That was a big one that got thrown in my face. And I was like, you were allowed to do research on guns. And they're like, well, I wasn't allowed to use federal money. Yeah, that just
big
seemed
difference.
like, yeah, everybody wanted to go there with that. I think the other one that I saw a lot was throwing around the number one killer in youth is firearms, right? The one way of death is the youth, and obviously using 1 to 19 seemed to be the gold standard there. Is there anything that you noticed? Was there some kind of repetitive question or statement that you saw?
Those were definitely a big part of a lot of the conversations. Other than those, I think probably one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle was in the conclusions. There was maybe 30 to 40% of the presentations I heard that their conclusion included that idea of, without necessarily being tied to the data, the idea was, we need more research in this area that might fit the narrative better than this, was what I was taking away. And that wasn't said out loud, right? Maybe actually in one or two cases that was basically said out loud, but it was kind of like, in fact, with the privately manufactured firearms, when I did have a question, but I made a little observation in the beginning and I asked, along with the detailed data question I was asking if she agreed that this data shows that too much has been made of the problem with privately manufactured firearms. And she almost like undermined her own research to say, well, this is the first time we've looked at the data and we hope more research is done. And I wouldn't draw that conclusion yet because it's early in the process. And it's like, you're one of the most respected researchers here and you're using like CDC, NDVRS data. Like this is the gold standard of research. And yet you're backing away from it because it doesn't really fit the narrative. I don't know about her personal politics or agenda, but certainly maybe some of the funders or other people in the room. So that was a recurring theme for me, was that, well, this didn't show what we expected to see. So not, I'm going to change my mind radically and maybe we should refocus. It was, so we really need to do more research on this. And depending on how comfortable they were in the room, and maybe more on Monday and less on Wednesday, at least when I was in the room, they were saying the awkward part more or less out loud.
Yeah. I know you had some strong feelings. I know I did. I talked about it on the previous show about the keynote speaker and then the speakers that followed the keynote speakers. Those were very too interesting.
The keynote speaker
on it?
Speakers is interesting because I've been in a lot of conferences and a lot of events. Like I was at a martial arts self-defense business conference 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago in Vegas. And it was hundreds of people from around the country, a few from around the world, really dealing with business development and curriculum development and protocol development for people that ran primarily unarmed defensive training, martial arts type stuff. And the keynote speaker was the dude who had to saw his own arm off when he got trapped in the cave out in the desert. Remember that guy?
Yeah,
nothing to do with martial arts.
Or was it?
Yeah, nothing to do with martial arts, nothing to do with business development, right? Just a guy telling a good story. And so take it, and again, I think that's pretty common, right? You have somebody interesting speaker come in to speak to your group. They may not be of your group. And I have to say that I really think that there's some amount of that, especially when she described her own work, that speaker wasn't really of the rest of the presenters or of the conference in the way that, like, for example, the guy who won the award, right, who got up and gave his presentation, he clearly was being honored by that organization and by their leadership as, here's an example you should follow, as opposed to, here's an interesting woman that we can all respect what she's done and maybe agree with her mission, even though it may not be aligned. I mean, the word firearm wasn't even used in her presentation at all. It wasn't on a single slide. It wasn't part of her work. She was talking about homicide and affected population and the aftermath for survivors of homicide. So it was interesting. It was powerful. I'm sure it's important work, but we were not alone in cringing when she said, I want you to think of your research as activism. That was that is not anything that I believe that conference or its leadership stands for. And while there were people that wanted to defend her as a human, I was really trying to be careful to not be attacking her, which I have no, like I said, I don't know that much about her. I know that statement doesn't seem to belong at a research conference with science and objectivity. And the only person who even began to try to defend that statement in the whole time was someone that just happened to be like eavesdropping and barging in on a conversation, who was honestly drunk at the hotel bar at 11 o'clock on the second night. So I don't think that anybody really was comfortable with her saying that. And I did David Yamane, along with a couple of people that I work with at the Firearms Injury Prevention Initiative out at CU Boulder. That's a table I was sitting at during the keynote. And they all looked at me like, please, Rob, don't go to the mic. Because they knew I really wanted to get up on that mic in front of 1,000 people and ask that woman what the hell she meant by research as activism. But I didn't. So the lion stayed down.
The lion
on that
was
one.
calm on that one.
I wasn't calm. I was breathing through it. David Yamane was there. He was ready to he might have tried to tackle me or block. I don't know what he would have done, but I resisted. And then the other two speakers got up. So for those of you who don't know, maybe from Mike's, the two guys that got up, basically it was like they were trying to be funnier than they were, and they were trying to be casual and like cool, which, I mean, low bar. It's a research conference, right? It's like a bunch of math nerds, honestly, like looking into social issues. So low bar for being the coolest guys in the room. But they really ran a gun control pep rally after we have this seemingly unrelated but interesting presentation where I'm already keyed up because of this activism research connection that she made. Then these guys get up as the dynamic duo, kind of casually tossing it back and forth and laughing at their own jokes and getting the room to go along with it. Like I said, it was a pep rally, but these were the two deputy directors of the White House's office for gun control. That's not really the official name, but that's what it is. These are the two co-directors of it. And I was disappointed to see them up on stage. I was super disappointed to see them talking to the room like everybody worked for them. I was annoyed, bordering on getting a little bit agitated when they got the whole room to applaud Polymer 80 going out of business and the way they presented that and saying, yeah, we changed the rules about ghost guns and we got that done. Isn't that right, man? And he's like, yeah, we did that, bro. And one of the biggest companies in the game decided to go out of business instead of playing by our rules. And everybody applauded. Well, not everybody, because I was like, motherfuckers. So they did not open the mic. I really wish they had opened the mic on them. But in some ways, and I think it actually, for us, for the contingent of gun owners and gun industry representatives that were there, it might have worked out better because it didn't cause a confrontation. I didn't get up on the mic and say, hey. They ended, if you recall, with this idea that we want this room to be bigger. We want more people here doing this research, da-da-da-da-da. And then it ended. So I beelined, and some of the people I was with from CU Boulder and Yamane were like, oh, no. And I beelined right up there to the main table with the director of the conference, who people don't know, like of all I do a lot of things, like you said, like I've got a lot of hats. I've done a lot of things in my life. And some of the weird things I've done, like I am an author on a peer reviewed journal paper in like one of the most respected medical journals in the community. And medical journals have their own issues about whether you respect them at all anymore or not. But the co-author, the doctor that invited me, she's the dean of Yale Medical School. She invited me to do this with her. We've worked together on some projects before. She's the director. She's like organizing this conference, right? As part of the body that puts it together. And she's sitting next to these guys. She's clearly like buddy with these. She knows these guys. And we don't, Megan and I don't agree on everything at all, but we do agree on some of the stuff that needs to happen, and working with gun owners and using the right kind of language and having trusted messengers is a big part of it. So he's standing there with him, and she sees me coming. The president of the organization, who I'd only kind of casually said hi to, but hadn't really had an interaction with, she sees me coming. These guys don't see me coming. I reach up and I grab one by the shoulder and I reach out to shake the other one's hand. And while I've got his hand, I kind of pull him and I go, hey guys, I think this room might be bigger than you think it is already. And they look at me and I'm like, and I wouldn't let go of the guy's hand because I'm from the gun industry, and I had friends that worked at that company that you just got the whole room to applaud about getting shut down. And they were like, well, the one guy who I was holding hands with, he recognized me. He knows me, and I know that he knows who I am. We have some mutual people we know in
Was
the
that
industry.
Wilcox?
And
Was that
yeah,
Wilcox?
yeah.
Yeah.
And the other guy was like, I got to take a selfie with some other people. He like got out as quick as he could. But the conversation with him, well, meanwhile, like the body language with the other people that were around, some people clearly did not want to be part of this. Other people could not like wait to hear what was being said, and not at all like I'm not trying to say that anybody from the organization looked at them and said, yeah guys, that we really don't appreciate you trying to co-opt our event. But I got a lot of backup in my challenge that, you know, it's unfortunate that we're here trying to do good work. We're trying to help people that want to do the research work, do things that will actually help the gun community and actually reduce negative outcomes. But I know people who got up and left when you guys started speaking from this room, and I can't bring more people here who could potentially help and be part of the conversation if there's going to be a gun control pep rally, you know, during the main luncheon of the event. And I'll give credit, like he backpedaled. He's just like, you know, hey, I know you, I know your career, I know what you do, and I don't want you to think that you know we were attacking you guys or anybody you know in the industry. Like honestly, we did get off on a little bit of a tangent, and I go, I get it. Red meat to the audience. Most of the people here, they're going to applaud. They're going to go with the flow. That's how crowds work. Gun control prep rally, I don't think really was the agenda. And Megan tried to explain, oh, Rob works with some of these people, and isn't it? And that was when he was like, oh, I know who Rob is. I know, I follow your work. I get it. So I got the sense that both speakers would have gotten different coaching, or maybe maybe they would have selected a little differently if like for next year, right? Because with people in the room who are going to challenge something that's maybe seen as a toss up for that audience, and are going to push back a little bit. And if that organization is sincere about wanting to work with gun owners, I think most of them are, most of the people involved are, then they're going to have to cut that off. So I think that there were those two cringe moments may not have seemed as cringy if we weren't there to call them out. But when I called them out to any of the leadership there, and then to find out that the president of the organization, and she kind of made fun of herself a little bit. She's like, I'm the last person that people are going to think is like pro gun. Her husband's a hunter. They shoot recreationally. They do trap shooting stuff, you know, and she's another one at a big university, you know, very well respected academic, doesn't fit the image of the gun owner or gun owner sympathetic in any way. But she made a point after that to come over and talk to me a little bit too. So I have good hope. Like I definitely want to be there next year. I'm hoping that some more people from the gun journalism side. I know I talked to Stephen Gutowski this week, a couple other guys, maybe more people there, not to be a nuisance and not to annoy people, but people who sincerely want to help steer the direction of the research into ways that can really help. I think it's important that we're there, and I'm looking forward to see if that tone is a little different next year, especially from the main stage at the big events.
Yeah, and G-Webs in the chat brought up a great question, basically saying, hey, if some 2A orgs showed up and had tables at this conference, would it have an effect? Would it be worth it? And absolutely. That's one of the things that
Yeah.
Rob and I were pushing for.
Yeah, in fact, I did get tentative permission, like green light, for at least a table for Second Amendment organization, and then obviously Walk Talk America being involved there too. I do think it's Walk Talk America is already very respected. I mean, Mike was there as a presenter. Like WTTA is seen as a different kind of animal from overtly Second Amendment organization being there with you know, to educate people about what responsible gun ownership looks like, alongside WTTA and the work that gets done there. So I was really pushing for that with their leadership, because when you look at the list of sponsors, it's not all academic institutions that put on the event. It's not even all nonprofits. I think maybe it is. I don't want to speak to that definitively, but even if it's nonprofits, we've got plenty of nonprofits. The problem is having some of the more, let's say, like meme driven, contentious, like Twitter loving gun rights organizations there pounding on the table saying shall not be infringed. You're just gonna get in the way. So if somebody wants to be there to have like moderate, educated, articulate conversations with people that really don't know much about the gun industry or gun ownership, to help steer the conversation, not to just refute the conversation with rhetoric, then I do think they should show up. But some of the regular characters can just stick to talking to the in crowd at NRA convention.
Yeah, another question in the chat. Great question. Like, was every town there? Yes, every town had
Giffords, every town, Brady,
Giffords,
Brady, they were all.
JJ from Brady was there. You know, it's really interesting because people think like it's like Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. Like we're going to see each other in a room and it's like, it's on. And it's really not. It's just, I mean, some of the organizations that we consider anti-gun, beelined it for me to say, hey, they love the work. They follow it. They love the website. Sometimes we have the exact same message too. Like I know Brady's done a good job of really like redefining their stance on secure storage and things like that. Is if you didn't know the flag in the background of the person speaking, it could be somebody
100%.
from any gun organizations. This is really a chance for us to come together and have and play with each other's ideas in a graceful manner.
Yeah, the big difference is sorry, just real quick, the big difference on because I know we're going to get like attacked over that, right? Because there's always those snipers out there in internet land. The big difference is the government involvement. So if somebody's talking about why people should get training or why people should prevent unauthorized access, what I say and what somebody else on the other side of this fight might say could be 99.9% of the same until you get to the part where, so we need more laws. And I'm saying, so we need more education, right? And that's really the only difference in a lot of these cases, which makes me want to circle back. I said I was going to talk about what wasn't there. You know what wasn't there? I didn't see a single piece of research, presentation, poster about assault weapons. I heard them mentioned in passing in different presentations, but there was no research aimed at proving or disproving that assault weapon bans would make people safer, or magazine capacity. I didn't see any of that. So universal background checks, we saw that. Waiting periods, we saw that. Abstinence, in other words, don't have guns, we saw that. But I really do think that the gun controllers have pretty much given up on magazine bans and assault weapon bans because there is no data to support their being important, and there's no taste for them anywhere across the country, and especially in the halls, the legislative halls, so or in the courtrooms. So I think that's really important. So sorry, I'll let you finish.
No. I was going to say, if any time that those questions came up, they were usually private at the bar, somebody just asking my opinion on it or what I thought, right? And they were just filling in a blind spot. So it was always when those things did you're right. I didn't hear many of them in the presentations. As a matter of fact, sometimes I heard people point out that handguns, like they actually pointed out that we pay so much attention to this, and handguns we found were used, in most of these cases in that research study. G-Web's had another great question, right? So do we have more than a few that would do well there? Do we have a few organizations? I think so. I think
I'm not.
there's.
I mean, we can have another. G-Webs, do it live with me, and I'll name names. WTTA isn't the place. I need to say, don't bring that guy. Yeah, no, I do. I think there's a lot of people that would do really well there. Again, like Gutowski comes to mind, Petrolino comes to mind, John Richardson with his blog comes to mind. As far as journalists really having good conversations and asking good questions, and not just being there to pound on the table.
Cheryl Todd.
The
Cheryl Todd is a great
Still,
example.
Todd would have she would be a great representative of the gun community there. I'm sure to have really, good, meaningful conversations. And I don't, this is not, I don't want to pretend to do an exhaustive list. I'm just saying there are a number to answer the question. Yeah, I do think there are a lot of people from the gun community who could get in there and ask good questions and offer good observations on the research that's being done. But the idea would not be to go there to protest the work that's being done. Right. That's juvenile, and it's beside the point. Right. You're not going to go there to protest what they're doing and change anybody's mind. You're just going to get people to say, I'm going to do a research study on gun owners being idiots and potentially that contributing negative outcomes. And that's not going to help us.
Yeah, I did. And I know we're up against it. I just want to kind of put a bow on it to say, everyone kept asking me a recommendation. And one of the recommendations that I constantly said over and over again was I'd like to see some research done on gun laws that we think are positive, right? That we assume are positive, that have unintentional consequences. And every single researcher was like, that's fair. You know what I mean?
Yep. Especially with red
That's an
flag laws.
example.
Yeah, do red flag laws push people away from mental health? Obviously, a big focus we have at WTTA. And a lot of them really, it's a light bulb moment for anybody on the gun control side that's pro red flag law. When I make that point, like there isn't a single red flag law, and I'm unaware of any that have even been proposed federally or at a state level that require the involvement of a mental health professional to find out what's really going on and get this person who supposedly is a danger to themselves or others actual help. And that light bulb goes off with people, even to the point of, like, if one of those laws showed up and we got the data, did the mental health professional find them to actually need help, or did the mental health professional say, yeah, give the guy his guns back, it's not a problem? I think we need that data, right? So it's, no, I'm not pro red flag law, but if there's going to be one passed, I need to see one that actually involves mental health professionals in any state or at the federal level, wherever it's going to end up being passed anyway. If that's included, I'm going to, in the back of my mind, say, well, in a few years, at least we'll have some data to really see what's going on here. And it's not just thinly veiled gun control, which at this point, I really believe it is.
Yeah, another bow I want to put on there is not one person had an issue when they asked me about red flag laws. And I had a sticker on my badge that said, ask me
Yeah.
about ERPOs, right? I was inviting that. Not one person when I said, hey, I believe that if you're not allowed to own your firearm and your firearm needs to be taken away from you, that you're in crisis, and I don't even want you to have your car at that point, right? And I think that made a lot of researchers think like, oh, wow, like that is a great point. Like we can't just say we're taking this one thing away and then everything's going to be copacetic. Like, they need to see that there's a bigger issue here. And if we really care about humanity, then we need to get people help, and we need to watch them around their knives and everything else that they can, potentially cause harm to themselves and other people with. But one thing I do want to plug before we get out of here is that we have the second Walk the Talk America survey coming out. We're going to be running it from Friday to January 31st. You'll see more information online. We're going to send out a newsletter. Granted, this is not a way to do research. A lot of researchers crapped all over this, but we don't have $10 million like Matt Miller says to run this properly.
Naming names.
I will go. Yeah, listen, it's all good, right? Like one of the things about Walk to Talk America is we have allowed ourselves to embrace all walks of life and everything that they think, should be or how it should be. I'm all for that. Like Matt and I disagree on certain things, but I've sat at a bar with Matt and we've agreed on 50 million things that are outside of gun world. So not a bad guy, just when it comes to this, a little emotional. But having said that, back to the survey, I just want to make sure that everyone understands why we're trying to collect this data, because nobody's asking these questions and we need real gun owners. Once again, we know this stuff is flawed. You don't just like blanket out a survey. There's a science behind it. David Yamani would kill me. I can actually make David Yamani upset, which is weird because the guy never gets upset because he's like,
He walked out of one of the presentations.
He did?
He got up and walked out of one of the presentations because he was so frustrated at like supposed academics not being impartial.
Oh, that's great. Because he trust me, he calls me on my shit all the time, which, like when I make a post or Kevin, we make a post, he's not cool with it. He lets me know, which is checks and balances, right? But like I said, we don't have the money to do these proper researches. And that's one of the things that I wanted to talk to people up there about is maybe one day, one of these schools of medicine would love to do a research project with us and incorporate us into it. Because I really think that would be cool. But just wanted to plug that. Rob, tell the audience how they can get a hold of you, what's going on, anything you want to plug.
Well, 2 days from now, I had ABC News here. We're live YouTube, so I can't show you, but we did a replica of what we believe to be the gun that was on Luigi Mangione when he was arrested, which then we also allegedly then obviously believe that was the gun we saw kill the United Healthcare CEO on 6th Avenue in Manhattan, a 3D printed gun. And we talked about the realities of 3D printed guns and sort of, it's not just magic. It's not like putting something in a microwave and it just magically comes out. There's a lot of other work that has to be done. Again, we talked about this research data. As always with these news outlets, we don't know what's going to make the edit and what it's going to look like. Ask me Friday morning if I think it was a good idea. Again, I like to be in the room. I like to have the conversation. And I don't think they had anybody else on the show that I know of who actually is pro private gun making or has done it themselves. So we'll see how that gets edited. But Thursday night, 10 o'clock Eastern, they're doing a 1 hour special. It seems a little early, but they're doing a 1 hour special already on the United Healthcare killing.
Well, listening audience, thanks again for joining us. I want to thank all of our sponsors for making this possible. And until the next time, stay mentally healthy.
Thanks, guys.